Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's one of those times where I have to refill my gouache pans, and I thought this would be a good time to talk about dried gouache versus fresh gouache because my take on this topic has been completely changed and I hadn't noticed or talked about it in my channel at all. I am also going to be showing you guys a little bit of a sketchbook tour on where I've been so far with my daily sketchbook for this year. And it's all before I show you guys another one of my painting over my pen sketches video. So it's going to be a really fun one. I hope you guys enjoy this one. And yeah. So when I first started with gouache, I would always prefer to use fresh gouache. And even when I only used my Himimiya gouache, I remember leaving my little gouache cups out in the seal and only taking out a little bit of the gouache that I need for a painting. That's how much I preferred using fresh gouache. And even as I transitioned into using artist quality gouache, my thoughts and opinions on that didn't really change, or at least I didn't notice that it changed. It's been pretty recently, I'm thinking maybe this past year, that I've preferred using dried gouache, and I will talk about later why. It is still in most artists' opinions that fresh gouache is better to use. But as you can see, this is now my second or third time to refill this palette. I haven't used gouache as often as I have in the past year since I had this set where I poured my gouache in. These are all mostly my Holbein gouache, but there's a few of them that are from Sui Gouache, and it's a Korean brand that is mostly owned by one artist, Sui, and it's one of my favorites. It's absolutely beautiful, and most of the colors that you will see that are a little bit more unique, and I will talk about them when I do, those are all from Sui. There's not much of a quality difference between the two. I've used Sui for a long time now, so I can attest to that. The only thing that I can't and I haven't tested about it is the light fastness of the paints, because I don't really display my paintings. Other than that, it feels just like my Holbein gouache, and the colors that they have are gorgeous. So most of these are Holbein. One thing that I did change from the initial gouache that has dried is using the peachy color. The initial pale coral in the palette was from Holbein, and since my tube dried out completely and I couldn't pour it in, I used my Sui on top of it. As for the rest, I tried to use the same colors that I had in the palette initially. The only other color that I think changed is the jet black from Holbein. I ran out of it, so I had to use my other black, which is from Mayberry. So only those two changed from the original colors, and most of them are either Holbein or Sui. So one thing that is consistent every single time I have poured my gouache in is that the gouache will always crack when they dry, and I've sort of just accepted that. There are ways to prevent it. I just really don't care as much. And also it involves a lot of patience where you wait for it to semi-dry and then pour more, and I just don't have that. I use this palette so often that I don't really have the time to do that. I also think that this process is so exciting. I've done this 3 times now, and I've filmed every single time. This is just the first time that I am sharing it with you guys. I want to bring attention to this color from Sui because it looks gorgeous. And I thought it's interesting because it has separated from the tube, but it doesn't really affect its performance. I just thought it would be satisfying to see on video because it's one of the only colors that's separated. And as you can see, you can really see the colors that make up this gorgeous, gorgeous color called Docto Evergreen. This is one of those colors that are absolutely unique to Sui, and I actually used it so much more than I would have expected. These colors, this lamp green, Docto Evergreen, some of these grays, I didn't really expect to use them as much as I actually ended up doing. I just wanted to fill up this palette, but all of these colors I ended up using almost regularly. Maybe the only two that I haven't used at all is the gold and the pearl white, which are metallic colors. I haven't really found myself the need to use them, but I just have them there just in case I might need them. So you will see in this process that there's some paints that are a lot harder to mix than the others, and it's really just because they have dried in the tube or they're very thick initially when they come from the tube. I think it's super satisfying when they are a little bit runny from the tube because they just settle into the pans by themselves. Most of the time though, when they are a little bit runny like that, they do tend to deflate in the pans. So if you don't like that, may just make sure you wait a couple of days for it to dry before you pour more in. I will be listing all of the colors I used in this palette in the description in case you guys are interested in it. Most of the time, I don't really need to refill all of these pans. It's just the ones at the center, which are actually the bigger pans. Just with the nature of gouache, I tend to use these lighter colors much more than I do these darker ones. And even the ones that aren't white, they're super pigmented. I don't really need to use them that often. I just like to have them all more even when I do pour out my gouache. So I've just been talking about how dried gouache is and the process of refilling this up, but I will talk more about the comparison between both of them later. Before I do that though, I wanted to show you guys where I've been with my sketchbook and how I've been using this dried gouache lately. These are all pretty recent since I started this journal in January. So I do want to note that this journal isn't meant for watercolors. So when you do see the gouache here, I either use it very thick or in single layers. But I want you to show you guys some examples where I did use it pretty thin, like this girl right here. This is gouache used very thinly and on very thin paper, but it just speaks to the quality of these Holbein gouache. Look at how gorgeous that one swipe of that color is. The rest I used the gouache a little bit more thick. So most of the time when you see them here, I actually use them over my pen, over my ballpoint pen. So these are still very thick, even though they have dried on my mini pens. I'm still able to get very thick applications of them, especially these two. These are more what I would call oil painting applications, so very thick, so thicker than my usual sketches here. But I just wanted to show you guys the possibilities that you could do with gouache even when it's used like this. This is one of my most favorite paintings. Just here, it's actually just used with the gouache that I have on my mixing palette. So all of the colors on the side of my palette. A lot of these can still get very vibrant colors, even though the gouache obviously mix with each other more when they are dried like this, especially when there's so many colors that I use together. Yeah, this is one of the only ones that I did use gouache on watercolor paper, and you do see the difference. But even when it's on really thin paper like this landscape, this, by the way, is a master study. I will put the artist's name in the screen, but look at how gorgeous that is. Colors look vibrant together, and they're very thick, just like on this painting. So you are still able to get very thick application with gouache, unlike I initially thought before. This one where you can see the line work underneath is actually very intentional. I made sure to use the gouache very thin because I like the flow of the line work underneath. The line work was done on another day, and then the painting over it was done months after. It's one of those things that I do. The sketchbook is just paint over my sketches when I'm not in the mood to paint, when I'm not in the mood to draw. So this other one is done with soft pastels and gouache. I did a video on that one in case you guys want to see that. Most of these are just sketches with my pens, but a lot of these you'll see the gouache used very thick over the pens. It's a little twilight scene right here, and this is the last one that I have using gouache. I also have some inserts. This one is one of my absolute favorite paintings. Look at this, it's very thin, single layer application with my gouache, and it really speaks to the vibrancy of these colors that I'm able to get this much variation in the colors with just very thin paint in the gouache. And yeah, just wanted to show you guys the possibilities and all the stuff I've been working with dried gouache from this gouache palette. And I will be showing you guys a process for this painting while I talk about why I love dried gouache now versus fresh. So this painting that we will be doing is of Axela on Instagram. I will leave a link to her profile in the description. It's such a gorgeous painting, and I wanted to capture it with very warm, very colorful colors, and especially the ones that are unique to the palette. I wanted to show you guys in action for this painting. I started with a very messy red ballpoint pen sketch. Just wanted to get the dimensions right before I did the painting. I will also be using the gouache in the oil painting application. That's not what it's supposed to be called, but it's the consistent comment that I get whenever I post these styles, so I will call it that. But while I show you guys the process, I wanted to talk about why I've been using gouache dried in my palette like this for a year now and why I love it so much. The main reason why I love using dried gouache now is for the convenience. And while there's still a lot to say about fresh paint and fresh gouache used straight out of the tube, the main reason why I'm able to use gouache so much now is because I have them all placed conveniently in this one palette. While I still loved using gouache before, I didn't really use it as often because it takes a lot of steps before I can do that to sort through all of the tubes I have, and it's also almost overwhelming to do that, to plan out my color palette before I start and to pour them out into a larger palette where I can mix them together. Having them all in one place is just so convenient. I can take this around, I can move between my two desks because that's really all the traveling I do when I paint. But most importantly, I can keep them in my desk and I'm reminded of them. I actually force myself to not use gouache so much in my sketchbook because I try to rotate between my different art supplies. These past few weeks, I've been so busy with this course that I'm taking online, so I have had to only use my gouache, and it's actually been super fun. I will still try to rotate between my art supplies, but just having this with me is super convenient and also is actually helping me a lot with my gouache application. I wanted to talk about the key differences between dried and fresh paint because I do think that a lot of them still hold up. One of the main thing that people talk about is the texture of the paint changes, and I do somewhat agree. If I'm being completely honest, I don't notice it that often, and that's because of the brands that I have on this palette. So if I were to use a student quality gouache and have it dry, when I reactivate that gouache, it's gonna have this grainy sort of texture, chalky texture when I reactivate it. So it's not gonna feel the same way as when it was fresh. But because I used Holbein and Sui gouache, I don't really feel that it does that. The paint doesn't feel grainier than it would be when it's fresh. It doesn't feel chalky at all. There's not really that much of a difference when it comes to the texture. I think the only thing that I could say is that it's hard to get the gouache to be super thick and to be super thick like in the butter consistency when I have to reactivate them from dry, but it's still possible. It's just a little bit harder. When it comes to the quality of the paint, there's not really any noticeable difference, or really any difference, if I'm being honest, at all when it comes to how they are when they're fresh versus when they are dry. Another differences between the two is application, and I will say that because it's hard to get this dried gouache to be super thick, that is the only reason that feels real between the two for me. So if you're someone who likes to put in texture in your gouache, if you like to use it very thick and actually almost have this 3D effect on your paintings, it's gonna be hard to do that when your gouache is dried in pans like this. I will say that it's hard to do even if you use fresh paint, if your paint isn't super thick anyway. But yeah, that is something that I will say is a difference, but because I don't really work with gouache in that way as much, I don't really notice it, if I'm being honest. Another difference that I have seen being talked about is mixing is easier to do when you're using fresh gouache, because when the paints aren't uniform in the moisture content, it's hard to get a consistent mix in tones with your gouache. But I do have a counter to that, in that even if you are using the same brand of gouache, some of them won't have the same texture and the same moisture content across different colors. So I think when it comes to that, it's not really that good of an argument. And also when it comes to that, it's mostly a quality of the gouache thing. Like I said, if there's not that much pigment in your gouache, it's gonna dry very chalky, and it's gonna be hard to get consistent results across your painting in that way. But if your gouache is super pigmented, it doesn't really matter if you have to reactivate them from your dried pans like I do. I think the very main difference between using fresh gouache and dried gouache is really just personal preference. I have noticed that people who do illustrations or like fine art, they prefer fresh gouache, and that is because they usually work in studios in an environment that is consistent. They don't really have to travel much, so they don't need the convenience of a palette like this. I think that's one of the main reasons people have a preference between the two. Meanwhile, I think sketchbook artists and people who do plein air work, they would prefer the convenience of having all of their colors in one place, and be able to carry them around together. I think that I'm mostly in between those two, and that I do some illustration works, but I mostly work on my sketchbooks with my gouache. But I do also just work in one place, so I don't really need to travel much with my gouache, but I do prefer the convenience of having it all in one place. Just the simplicity of having my gouache in my desk makes me use it more. And I am just so thankful for this palette for helping me use it so much and helping me practice with my gouache. So that's really most of what I can say for dried versus fresh gouache. I wanted to talk a little bit about this painting because it makes me super happy. I used a lot of my very bright lavender colors. I used a lot of contrasting colors in this painting. There's purples and yellows, especially on her sweater. I made the shadows this lavender color that's from Holbein, and the brighter colors on it I use a lot of yellow so that the purples will pop. And on her hair too, because I wanted to get the texture, I made sure that I had a contrasting base with the green and the reddish burnt sienna. So this painting, I was kind of scared that it might be too overwhelming because I use so many colors. I just get really excited to use as many colors as I can, especially when I just poured my gouache in. I'm always eager to use many of these colors together, but I don't think it really ended up being as cluttered as I thought it would be. I just had a lot of fun painting this, and I also like that we can still see the colors, the different colors in this painting. The photo is absolutely gorgeous, and I wanted to get the energy from that on this painting too. Make sure to check out her Instagram. I have it linked in the description. Please don't forget to do that. And as for this painting, after I have this nice base of all of the colors that I wanted to use, I am then using a thicker gouache with my palette, so it will be the same. So it will all come from the same palette. When I need a more opaque laydown of my gouache, I just make sure that I use less water in my brush, and I can get these very nice, very intense colors from this dried gouache set. And that is what I did. I just made sure that I applied my gouache a little bit thicker once I have the base colors that I wanted. And I also wanted to show you guys the different textures that I got in this painting by just using very contrasting colors with each other. But that is really it for what I had to say for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate everyone who leaves a comment in my videos. I've been having a lot of anxiety with posting on YouTube recently. I know it's not really anyone's fault but mine, but seeing you guys' comment, especially one that I got recently on Instagram, has been very motivating for me. So I will be posting as much as I can. I really appreciate you guys for watching. Thank you to my patrons for supporting me. Thank you guys for making it through the end. And I will be seeing you guys again soon. Bye.